2 years ago, Americans watched in horror as a crisis unfolded at the Kabul airport.
She was tear-gassed and beaten.
Images of thousands desperate to escape Taliban oppression filled our news feeds. More than 80,000 Afghans made it to America. But the story didn't end there.
It was very cold. There was no power, no heat.
Who would help our newest neighbors? I'm Andrea Smartin. In Stranger Becomes Neighbor, you'll hear the stories of some remarkable refugees who left their homes and their dreams behind, only to start over from zero.
Their only possession was 3 blankets.
And you'll meet Americans who stepped up to help them.
You want me to come when you deliver your baby.
What can one person do in the face of an international disaster decades in the making? That's Stranger Becomes Neighbor. Find us at kslpodcast.com. Follow us on Apple Podcasts or anywhere else you listen.
Hey, welcome to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction. More importantly, it's about recovery. And it's brought to you by our friends at useonlyasdirected.org. They got a 3-part solution for the opioid epidemic. That's speak out, opt out, and of course, throw out. And we want to say thank you to them for supporting us and allowing us to do what we do. I got my friend Dr. Matt here, and our guest today is Jason Coombs. We're going to get to him in just a second. But Dr. Matt, how are you?
I'm great. Doing good.
So I've had a couple of interesting conversations this week that made me think back and do some inventory on myself about my recovery. So I'll tell you, the first one is I've been working out with this group of guys every morning for about the past 10 months, Mike and Jeff. And I went to lunch the other day with Mike, and we were kind of going back and forth and, just getting to know each other a little bit better outside of the gym. And he asked me, he goes, "What were you like drunk?" He goes, "Because I've only known the sober Casey."
Oh, that's a good observation.
And I'm a pretty open book, and so often I'll say stuff that I used to do or whatever, and you can just look at his face. He's like, "Whoa."
You're telling some more stories?
Yeah, just just
what things were like back
then. He
then.
goes, I admire how open you are about your recovery, and I said, well, that's the only way I know how to do it. There's not really any other way for me to do
it. That fits your personality, and I think it is the healthiest. It indicates a person's all in. If you're just open and talk about things. Yeah.
So he was like, well, I never knew the drunk Casey. What were you like? And I tried to describe it. I go, I was pretty similar to who I am now, but there was times that I could get obnoxious, taken with myself, kind of mean, belligerent. For the most part, I considered myself a happy drunk, but there were quite a few people that are on the other end that would disagree.
Okay. Now, that would be something – that's a Casey I don't know. Also is the mean, belligerent. I have a hard time picturing you that way, even drunk, because I would say your personality is pretty consistent, regardless of drinking or not.
And I thought it was, but I explained it to him this way. I said, if we were in a party situation and there were 10 guys there, 9 of the guys would be having a great time. There would be one guy that wouldn't be so happy because he'd be either getting the butt of the jokes or
I see.
Then it got me thinking. There's people walking around right now that are listening to this podcast that had an unpleasant experience with me.
Yeah.
And I want to say I'm sorry, but there's quite a few people out there that I think that's where I'm in my recovery, is where I need to start making amends.
Oh, okay. So that got you thinking about that.
And I think I'm starting to get comfortable enough with my recovery, secure enough with my recovery that I can start making those amends. I didn't want to make the amends premature because I didn't know how this is going to end. Now, don't get me wrong. I still don't know how this is going to end, but I have a good idea, a good direction, and a good path in where I'm going to where I feel like I could sit down and talk to people and say, you know what? I'm sorry, and I'm genuinely sorry, and this isn't just lip service. This isn't me just trying to get you back on my side. I've done some bad things. I've hurt some people. I've ruined some things, and I took a lot of stuff for granted.
So have you sat down and identified people that you feel like you need to contact?
I'm starting that list. Okay. I've got a short list that's in my brain all the time that I know I need to. And some of these people I see every day.
Really?
But I haven't sat down and said, listen, it couldn't have been fun for you. And you stood by me and you believed in me.
Do you feel like I like what you said, that you didn't want to rush into that. You didn't know how this was going to end, et cetera. But do you feel like you've been doing a little avoidance of this? Because this is
100%.
hard.
100%.
This is a hard thing for a person to do.
Because they're going to say some stuff that I have to listen to.
Right.
And that's not easy, man.
No, that feedback could be pretty
brutal,
tough. Yeah.
You know, and some of it's my kids.
Oh, yeah.
Some of it's my ex-wife, my ex-wife's family, my family.
People that you're still really close
with. People that I see around town that I've ruined events for. And that when I see them at the gym, I take a right.
Okay.
And I need to go left because that's where the machine is. But I go right because
you can go the long way.
I call that cardio.
There you go.
You know, but I can rationalize and justify it all I want. But I'm to that point in my recovery where I have to start having some real conversations.
So how do you think you're going to do it? Because I think there are different ways people go about this.
Well, I think what I'm going to do at first is put together the list of people I need to make amends to that I can remember.
Right. Remember, if you don't write something down, it's not real.
Yeah, so I'm going to write it down.
Yeah.
And then I think I'm going to either send a text or leave a message and say, hi, I would like to talk to you about this. If you want to. And
you can do that in person if they're willing?
If I see them in person, yeah. And,
but I mean, are you going to offer to talk in person?
Every time. If I can do it in person, I want to do it in person. But there's going to be some people that do not want to talk to me.
And you'll have to, I guess, respect that and ask them how, what permission they give you and how to communicate with them. Maybe they'll just want an email or maybe they don't want anything. I don't know.
And maybe they just want to forget it. So, but I've got to put it out there because I think that's where I'm at in my recovery.
Good. Well, I would highly recommend in person if they're comfortable with that. It'll be a whole different experience, much more opportunity for a healing experience if you do it in person, if they're willing to do it in person.
All right. Well, that's why I talked to you, because you're the therapist.
And one other thing I want to loop back around to that you said was, how is this going to end? And I want to go a little Rogerian therapist on you for a second and say, it's not going to end. This is, he focused on this idea of becoming. That human beings, healthy human beings, are always in this process of becoming who they are. And so you're in this process of becoming who you are. And a big part of that over the last couple of years has been the sobriety and the recovery. And I would say it's not going to end. It's just going to keep evolving and getting better. And I think that's the way to look at it.
Yeah, and I like the way you phrased that better than the way I said it. Because in recovery, one thing you learn right when you get in, as soon as you say you got it, you don't got it. So you always tell yourself you don't got it. And you're always striving forward. You're always moving forward. And you're always trying to become a better person.
Yeah.
And
I really like that idea because it allows for restarts every day, and you're looking at the big picture of your life, and we're not trying to get to some artificial goal. We're just trying to always be in the process of becoming who we would like to be.
I love it. Hey, our guest today is Jason Coombs, and I've known him for a while. We actually worked in the same industry for a while. We're going to talk to him about that. But he's the owner of Brick House Recovery. It's up in Boise and Idaho Falls. But he made the trek down here, said he's going to come on the program and tell his story. Jason, how does your story start?
Oh, man, that's a big question. And I absolutely love that you led into this podcast talking about amends, because part of my reason for being here, and the reason that the book became a reality, is that it's my way of living an amends to some really important people to me. For example, my mother. The book is written for any parent or family member who has a loved one who's addicted, but the avatar that I had in mind when I began the process of really honing in on who is my audience, it's the middle-aged mother who has an addicted son and doesn't know where to turn for answers and may have searched how to help an addicted loved one online, and they get a vast variety of opinions and people trying to sell stuff. And
it's like IKEA instructions. You can't understand it.
You can't understand it.
And you're going to have leftover parts. The book is called Unhooked: How to Help an Addicted Loved One Recover. And you wrote this when?
It's been over the course of 10 years, and it was published a year ago, May of 2019. But it was a 10-year project.
Now, you're in recovery yourself.
I am.
So how did that story begin?
Yeah, that is it's where it all began. You know, I was working here at KSL Television, so it's nice to be home. You know, this is I have roots here. I worked with some people that some still work here, and it was while I was a salesman here selling television ad space that I was in a car accident, and that car accident and the injury resulted in going to a doctor's office, and the doctor's office prescribed me an ungodly amount of Oxycontin, and that's when the addiction really took hold. But I had dabbled with alcohol and with pain pills back in high school and those early years.
As the kids would say, recreationally.
Totally. And to me, there was no problem. You know, that was the stage where it was exciting and fun. And the only problem I had were my parents finding out. That was the problem. So, you play that
Which
game.
was the same problem all your buddies were having, so you were
right.
probably, united in that. How old of a kid were you the first time you remember taking something, either a pill or having a drink for recreation? Do you remember about how old you were?
I was about 16, 17 years old.
And where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Bountiful.
In Bountiful,
Utah.
okay. Yeah.
So I'm my roots
Local,
are here
yeah.
in Utah.
Uh-huh.
So, and
what
my
was-
recovery tribe's here in Utah as well.
Okay. What was that like for you? Do you remember that first experience of drinking?
I do. I was at my buddy Sam's house. His parents were out of town. And it was me, Sam, Fonz, and...
You hung around with the Fonz?
Oh, yeah.
Hey.
Oh, yeah.
He must have been a cool kid to earn that nickname.
He jumped a shark.
Oh, such a stud. Yeah. He my buddy, yeah, I'll protect his anonymity
Yeah, it's okay.
a little bit. But we were at his parents' house, Sam's house, and the parents were out of town. His grandmother was living with him, and his grandmother kept a bottle of whiskey in the cabinet. And one weekend, while we were staying over there, Sam pulled it out, and I remember drinking 7 shots of whiskey, my first time ever drinking alcohol.
That's a lot.
7 in a row. They were coaching me through. I remember it tasting like gasoline. I remember not enjoying it at all and having, the gag reflex immediately. But I was able to hold it down and got to a point of blackout. Don't remember what happened the rest of the night. I just remember waking up the next morning with magic marker written all over my face, all over my chest, all over my arms and legs.
I've been markered a bunch of times.
Have you really?
Yeah, that's the thing they do at the fraternity.
Okay.
Like one time I was so passed out that they drew eyeballs on my eyelids.
Yeah.
And so it looked like I was awake. Look, there's photos out there somewhere. I know there is. Yeah, but so you got markered.
I got markered. I didn't know that was a thing.
It's a thing.
I knew it was a thing for me and my story, but I
Nope,
didn't
it's a
know it was
thing.
like a thing in the fraternities. But yeah, dude, I what I do remember though is I got real sick right after that, and then I made my way upstairs, and my buddies were up there, and they were telling me stories of things I said, things I did, and it was like they were talking about the guy I always wanted people to see me as, which was life of the party, secure, funny, and someone that would be awesome to invite to every single party.
Were you typically more of a reserved, quiet person at that age?
Yeah, I had insecurities since I was as long as I can remember, I had insecurities. I also really struggled with focusing, and I described my anxiety as a kid like I always felt like I was late for the bus. You wake up in the morning and it's like, I'm late, and so you brush your teeth and run out the door, and the rest of the day is kind of that
off.
feeling. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, I mean, how many times have we heard that? And in my practice, specializing in anxiety, I can tell you that, most of our people who have significant anxiety, it starts with a biological predisposition. So, kids just feel, that's a great way to describe it. Feeling like you're always late for the bus is just your biology is tuned a little too high. And that does make a person very self-conscious, self-aware, sometimes kind of withdrawn. Yeah.
Yeah. And I still struggle with that today. I'm not going to lie. Like that hasn't changed. It's a chronic condition of mine. However, I can treat it today. Recovery has given me a lot of tools.
But you said that drinking, you blacked out, but the kid they were describing, you were kind of like, oh man, that's who I've always wanted to be. It must have relieved temporarily some of that anxiety for you.
Yeah, it was kind of like you got to put on your costume and become a superhero.
Right.
But you were sick, but they reinforced that you were such the life of the party that you must have said, I got to do this again.
Yeah, we went skiing that day, and I was really sick, but shook it off and going up the ski lift. I still remember being on the Wilbur lift up at Snowbird, and we were making plans to do it again, and I just remember that feeling and excitement of, this is my new solution. This is it. I just won't drink as much next time to get sick, but I'm all in. And so for years, it was my friend. It was my solution to doing life. And I think normal people that can drink get that because it helps bleed the pressure valve and all of that. But, as we know, and as many guests on this podcast have shared, at some point it kind of turns on you when you have this disorder.
There's so much self-medicating that goes on in the beginning to that kind of kicks off a person's addiction. And I would put this in that category because, it's nice to have friends when you're 48, but when you're 16, I mean, that's so important to
That's your currency.
Yeah, to be accepted and part of a group and be seen as kind of a cool kid. Some psychoanalysts have talked about that's a time of, trying to find a competency. Like, what am I good at? Who am I? You're striving every day. Am I accepted? Am I an athlete? Am I, whatever, And so when anxiety holds you back at that age, you're really missing out on actually something that's a very important developmental task. It's nice to be liked and have friends when you're older, but when you're that age, it actually is part of a need you have in order to develop a sense of yourself. And a lot of people at a young age who struggle with anxiety and feel excluded or on the outsides turn to drugs and alcohol at that age, and that starts to wire your brain in an unhealthy way during those early developmental years. I have a lot of empathy for people who struggle with anxiety at that age and then end up finding something that's such a quick fix but has so much damage down the road.
You're listening to Project Recovery. We're talking to Jason Coombs. He's the author of Unhooked, How to Help an Addicted Loved One Recover. We're talking about his story and his first introduction into alcohol. We'll hear more of that in just a few seconds here on Project Recovery.
It's the story of an American held in a dark Venezuelan prison.
Then all of a sudden they all kind of lined up. They pointed their guns at me. And this is the point where I thought, I'm going to die today.
I'm Becky Bruce. I spent a year working on Hope in Darkness, which now has more than 2 million downloads. Find it on kslpodcast.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.
So about 16, you have your first drink. You find this alter ego. He's the life of the party. And then you danced around with alcohol throughout the rest of your high school career, or how did that go?
Yeah, it was a dance. Sometimes I was doing it frequently. Other times I was not doing anything.
When I was in my active addiction, I used to tell my ex-wife and my mom and whoever would listen. And when they'd talk about the amount I drank, I'd always say, well, some days I win. And some days I lose. Some days I could manage it and nobody would know the difference. And then some days it was a dumpster fire, and everybody knew. And that's what I did. I danced with it until I couldn't dance anymore. I tell people it's like a toy. I played with it so much that it broke.
Yeah.
And I put it together a couple of times, but eventually it always just broke again.
That's a good visual, yeah.
And that's what it was. And so you said you did that throughout the rest of your high school career. And how was college?
College was post-mission for me, so I ended up right out of high school, went and backpacked Europe with my buddy, and went to Amsterdam and really just explored a lot of different things, drug and alcohol-wise. but I had an experience over there where I kind of had a moment of clarity as I was overlooking a city in France, and I was questioning on it, my path and my own, do I feel like I'm on the right path as a young adult? And there was this emptiness inside, and I made the decision to make a pivot and to kind of follow in my brother's footsteps, and ended up not just getting clean and sober, but it began to seek things that would be a little bit more meaningful to me. And that led me to, the church that I grew up in, and that led me to making the decision to go on an LDS mission to Brazil. And I happened to meet a character down in Brazil who ended up being really pivotal for me when it came time to get sober. His name's Dave Pinniger, but that encounter down there ended up saving my life, which is really cool how that worked out. And it was many, many years later, but it was post-mission. I got into college and I picked it right back up again. And but I wasn't so much into the group party scene. I would go to those, but that wasn't what like drove me. It was more of the private isolation, go to the park and, smoke a joint or smoke, I did a lot of pot.
Yeah.
That was my thing in high school or in college. It was pot.
Where did you go to college?
The University of Utah.
And you did you get involved in the Greek system there, going to those kinds of parties? No.
I kind of kept to myself. I had some buddies, but I was working at the time. I was working at another TV station here in the Valley, in Salt Lake, and then was working for the newspaper up at the U, the Chronicle, the Chrony.
Yeah, and smoking chrony.
And smoking a lot of chrony. Yeah, those were the good old days.
Yeah, right?
That's when it was working for me. I used to say, pot got me through college. I used to say that proudly. And sadly, I didn't
What was it
much.
doing for you? Like, why did you need it at that time?
It's a really good question, because I think a lot of parents and family members miss this piece about the love affair that people with addiction have with their substances. It was doing things for me that I would put in the category of superpowers. It was allowing me to focus. It was allowing me to sleep at night. It was giving me a lot of benefits across the board. I could go on a long list of those, but the benefits far outweighed any consequences in that early stage of pre-contemplation, where I did not need to change at that stage. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people, their drug and alcohol career can be disrupted when they're in pre-contemplation. And that's why I think relapse rates can be so dang high, because in the mind of the person using, there is no problem. The problem is that it's against the law. That's the problem. And I'm in trouble now. That's the problem. And that was me down the road, which we'll get into when I was, in drug court and I was, caught up with the law. I didn't want to stop and change my life. I just didn't want the consequences.
And you're using that term pre-contemplation, which is actually a research term, right? We talk about the science of behavior change, and pre-contemplation comes before, of course, contemplation, where a person starts to have some, the beginnings of insight that they may have an issue that needs to change or improve. But you're right, in pre-contemplation, typically the person is in such a state that they only see the benefit of whatever the behavior is. Others may question the benefit of the behavior, but you were saying it was helping you from your perspective, and you could list benefits that you felt like it was having for you. And to be honest, it may have had some benefits for a person who is struggling with anxiety and trying to succeed and deal with the stress and pressure of college and wanting to put himself out there. You're working for the newspaper and trying to make friends, and so in that pre-contemplative state, there's no desire to change, is there? Right.
Until those consequences began to mount, and those consequences began when I was working here at KSL and had that car accident that I led out with, and went to this doctor down in Midvale, and the doctor was unbeknownst to me, it was running Utah's largest OxyContin drug ring.
Oh,
and
wow.
It ultimately got dismantled, got raided, shut down, and all of us that were going to this doctor, our supplier dried up. And, that turns you to the streets.
That's a recipe for disaster. So
Right.
just to keep everybody in the know, so you said you got in a car accident, and you'd been kind of socially recreational, drinking and partying. But when you all of a sudden got this prescription of what you said was way more OxyContin than one person needed.
Yeah.
And you took one, and what did it do for you when you took one, that first one?
You want to hear a crazy story?
Yes.
That's what we're about. We want to hear the story. You bet.
All right. My coworker here at KSL, he doesn't work here anymore, but he asked me to go to lunch. And this was after a couple of days of being at home, post-car accident. And so he and I went to lunch, and we had a couple beers, nothing too crazy, and we came back to work. But on the ride back, he asked me the question if I was seeing anyone for my pain management. And I said, no, I'm not. And at that moment, he pulled out a jumbo-sized bottle of OxyContin 80s. Wow. And said, if you're interested, I know a doctor who prescribes the good stuff. If you're interested. And then he proceeded to actually crush the pill up, put it on a CD case. And for those that don't know what CDs are, that's how we used to listen to music. And he drew up 2 lines, and he snorted the first one and said, this will protect your stomach lining, and it'll hit you harder. Do you want the other one? And there was some other conversation in and around that, but this is the short version. And I said, yes, I do. And so I snorted my first line of OxyContin in the parking lot underneath us in this building that we're recording. I know. I hope that KSL Security's listening to this. They need to be watching how it's going on.
I'll tell you what, they're walking around right now.
Yeah.
And that's where it happened. And it blasted me off into a euphoria and a space that I had never felt before at that level. I had felt variations with alcohol and pot, but and that's where that whole thing began. And so I took him up on the offer. He introduced me to this doctor, and I went into the doctor's office that next week and gave the lady at the front my insurance card, and she gave me a packet of information, and she also gave me some instructions on how to fill out the packet. And the instructions, when I was sitting down there in the lobby filling it out, were having me write down symptoms that I didn't have to build a case on paper for a herniated disc, severe pain. And this was that.
What year was this?
This was 2004 time frame. 2003, 2004.
16 years ago.
Yeah. So, this is, if you want to go into my head at that moment, I'm looking at this, and my father's a physician. My grandfather was a physician. And so I had some familiarity with how the medical world works, and I knew that falsifying medical documents was not above board. However, I had this battle in my mind with these 2 voices of run like hell. This is shady. And then the other voice was, you have a legitimate reason to be here. You were just in a car accident.
Justification.
You need some pain pills. And
so I'm taking it you filled out the paperwork for a herniated disc.
I did. And then because at that moment I wasn't convinced I was going to get the prescription. I was just wanting to see what
fact-finding
happened. Right. And I went back, saw the doctor. He did a quick 30-second perfunctory exam on me, and we sat down at his desk, and he slid over a prescription for 120 OxyContin pills.
Wow.
I know. And then And this is where it gets a little crazy.
This is where it gets crazy?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure we passed crazy about 10 minutes ago.
I had no idea this kind of stuff existed. So I was just so, like, curious about it. And he slid over some instructions on where to go pick up the prescription, what to say, and who to say it to. And I took that prescription. As I was walking out the door, he said, "Oh, and when you're ready for a refill, contact your coworker." I'll leave his name out of it, and he'll schedule your next appointment.
Whoa!
Wow! So this doc was just acting as a drug dealer.
Yeah.
He was, and I assume he'd figured out how to make extra money off that, and he was kind of had people grooming future patients to bring them into him, it sounded like.
So there's a lot to this story that I'm going to spare all the details because we could get in the weeds with this whole thing, but the gist is that the Insurance Fraud Division of Utah publicly posted a org chart of this drug ring online, and I found it. And so when I speak at presentations, I show this org chart, and it looks just like a multi-level marketing pyramid. And so the doctor had these recruiters, these head recruiters, 3 of them, and those recruiters would go out and find sub-recruiters, and they were looking for patients that had good insurance policies and, patients that they could give, a pill to for free, and it was enough of a hook for them to go see this doctor. Because what happened each time we went back to see the doctor was not only did they run our insurance, but we had to come up with $1,200 cash and slide it under the table in an envelope on the table. But you get what I'm saying. Yeah. You got it. Okay.
Yeah.
You looked a little confused about it.
No, I always look like that.
You did not.
That's just my face.
But that was how that structure worked. And so when you have 139 patients that are getting 120, 80 milligrams oxys per month from this doctor, and that doctor goes away, the black market just skyrockets. It was the first one that was dismantled in Utah. Since there were plenty more that were raided and brought down, but that was the first. And I know this because I actually am friends with the DEA task force agent today. He and I, we've talked many times, and he helped me with the book and things like that. But
so all of a sudden, 120 people who get 120 pills a month are no longer able to get those pills. And what you're saying is that creates a vacuum. And so for those to get their fix, they had to go to the street.
That's right. And the cartels hear about that, and they start pumping black tar heroin into the crossroads of the West. And you've got this spike in ER visits, ER deaths, and that's where you start to get on the radar from the national statistic. Utah's got this reputation of being one of the states in the union that really have struggled with substance use disorder, particularly with opiates. Right. And a big part of that is this season of time, these few years right around that, when these prescription pain pill rings were getting raided and dismantled, and the cartels began to pump in black tar heroin, people were overdosing a lot more frequently. And you saw that spike. It's not like one day people just go out and say, I think I'm going to get on opiates this year. They were already doing it, and then
but they had to switch.
Yeah.
They had to switch.
I'm a little naive. So all of a sudden they take away your pills. Do you then go to the streets to try to get pills? And then if you can't get pills, then go to heroin?
Yep.
Is that
exactly right.
Okay.
Yep. But you can't afford the prices on the streets for those pills because they're going for $100 a pop. So how long can you sustain that before you go to a $10 balloon of heroin?
And so I don't want to tell your business or your story, but I'm guessing eventually you went to heroin?
I went to heroin. That's right.
How long did that take once your supply of pills dried up before you? No?
Not long. Couple days of being in withdrawals before it was just like, I don't care what it is, just get me something to make me feel better. And that's the struggle with addiction. And you guys have talked about it in other episodes about the fear of
we've had
withdrawal.
people on that tell many times goes, I wasn't afraid to die. I was afraid to get dope sick.
Exactly.
Bring on death. I welcome death. I don't want dope sick. They said it's the worst thing you could ever feel in your life.
Right.
And so at that point, the addict brain takes over, and you're just in survival mode. So I can see why somebody who grew up in Bountiful and went on a mission, went to college, had a great career, would make that jump pretty quick in 2 days because you don't want to feel that pain.
Right.
You're just in survival mode.
Yeah. And I'm going to quit tomorrow.
Oh, yeah.
You keep punting tomorrow to next week, and then
I do that with my lawn. I'm going to mow that tomorrow. I never end up mowing it, but I'm going to mow it tomorrow. And so all of a sudden, we just talked about it. You grew up in Bountiful. You went to the University of Utah. You worked for the newspaper. You worked for the television station. Your dad and your grandpa were both physicians, and now you're doing heroin from the streets.
Yeah. And it didn't take long before I blew all my savings, cashed in my 401k. I lost my job here at KSL.
I've done that.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
So we've probably been in the same human resources office.
I've been there.
You get it. I get it. That's one of the reasons when I saw your story, I was like, I like this guy. I like this guy. He can relate.
A lot in common.
And I lost a series of jobs after that, but your life just begins to circle the drain, and sometimes that circling takes longer than others, and ultimately it got to where you have experience, which is it just begins to go down that drain. And I did lose my marriage. I lost my home. I had no way to provide for myself, and so I was out here at Pioneer Park living during the winter. And I was not only doing heroin, but I got real hooked to crack cocaine. And it was the combo with alcohol. It was the combo that really took it down hard and fast. And ultimately, the charges came. The charges to 4 felonies and a misdemeanor for all the doctor shopping, the insurance fraud, the obtaining false prescriptions, distribution. Those caught up with me from that ring because all of the patients got charged. And I ended up going from the streets to a court-ordered rehab, and that was my first experience. You and I were talking about this before the show, Casey, that sometimes rehab can be the most dangerous place if you're not in a safe environment. And
or a good headspace.
That's right.
They say, if you want to become a better criminal, go to jail. You want to become a better druggie. Sometimes rehab will teach you those things, and those who are playing the game, which is scary to say. And not all rehabs are like that.
Right.
But depending on what you go in and what your motives are, if you're going in for help, then you can find help. But if you're going in there to avoid or figure out other things, that information's there as well.
That's right. It was in that rehab, that first residential rehab, where I was introduced to meth for the first time. That was the first time I ever tried meth. I had never even tried it before I was in rehab. And I was also introduced to the needle for the first time in that rehab. I had my first overdose in that rehab.
Crazy.
It's crazy. And so you're right. Like, not all treatment approaches or centers and programs are created equal. And you really got to go off word of mouth these days. Where is going to be a place that cares about actual recovery and emotional sobriety? Do
you, maybe you don't have an opinion on this, but do you feel that places that have a lot of court-ordered people in their rehab are higher risk for this sort of behavior in the rehab, or do you think that has no correlation?
It absolutely has correlation, because you get a lot more mix and a blend in the milieu of pre-contemplators, and a lot of their using careers were cut short because they got arrested or they got caught.
They're forced to be there. They don't have that motivation.
Exactly. There's no volition inside to want to change.
And don't get me wrong, Casey, we've had a lot of people on the show that a court-ordered rehab saved their life.
Oh, 100%.
And I am very supportive of rehabilitation over jail time. I'm grateful that we have those programs here. But I just feel like you're right. People are there because they're forced to be there, not because they want to be there. And so they're playing that game, like you said.
Well, you go to somebody, hey, look, here's your choices. You can do 3 months in jail or you can do 90 days in a recovery center. What do you choose?
Recovery center.
Recovery center almost every time.
Right. Well, sure.
You know, but I think it depends on the headspace you go in and if you're willing to accept the message. And sometimes people that are forced into a recovery center have found the message.
That's right.
And it is possible. Like I always say, there's a million different ways up Sober Mountain. You've got to find yours and just rock it.
Yeah.
So you were there. You tried meth for the first time.
Can we go back, though?
Yes.
I just real quick. I mean, I feel like we skipped over, you know, you somehow ended up living in Pioneer Park, and I wondered if you could just talk to me about what did you do to try to avoid being there? Like the picture here is of, you know, a college educated, you know, successful person who's married. Did you have children at the time? Any kids yet?
Not yet.
Not yet. And you're working a reputable job, and then you end up in Pioneer Park. Why didn't anybody take you in? What did you do to try to avoid getting there?
To be real honest, I chose to be out there because that's where I could use as much as I wanted around the clock. And that's where the hustle was. And so I didn't have money. And I had stolen a lot from my family members and my ex-wife. And so being out there protected them from me and my addiction. And I knew that. But it also kept me free from accountability. And so I'm sure I could have couch surfed. I could have found a place, but really that was where the action was. And when you're on crack cocaine, you're not sleeping anyway. So you're just living out there and doing the hustle. And that's where the hustle is. Pioneer Park's cleaned up a lot since then.
Sure.
But
were you ever embarrassed? That's why you didn't want to go couch surf or go to other people because of what you become?
Oh, yeah.
But it also sounds like you found a new business outlet. Like, I mean, you keep using the word the hustle. That's where the hustle was. I mean, you didn't have any money. Did you see this as, well, I can do both. I can feed my addiction and survive, make some money. Did you feel like you were kind of running the show out there a little bit?
Well, there was no money that I was making because it all was being used up in drugs. So I only earned more drugs. Mm-hmm. I only earned more alcohol.
You owed yourself to the company store.
That's right. That's right. What song is that?
I don't know. It's a cowboy song.
That's a good song.
Every cowboy song. You know.
It's a good song.
Yeah.
I love that song.
But so you're out there, you're doing the hustle, you're living on Pioneer Park, and you get caught up and you get sent to a drug court.
Yeah.
And you learned meth and shooting heroin for the first time. You even said you had your first overdose. So I'm taking that recovery didn't take.
No. So some good seeds were planted, though. But I would say that I progressed into that contemplation stage of change. When we talk about stages of change, I go deeper into that in the book because I think it's really important for family members to kind of identify where their loved one is at, because you can't skip changes and have lasting change. It's like someone that needs to go to the gym and work out. Like, they've got to get to the place where they're the ones willing to show up, get on the treadmill, and actually sweat. Not once, but every day for a period of time. And that takes inner volition. That takes, you can be compliant for a period of time, but the real change comes from going through pain. I always say that I heard it said that we change at the speed of pain. And sadly, that was the case for me. So throughout all of these experiences of being homeless and going to jail, I went to jail 7 times. I got 7 mug shots where you kind of see my affect change in each one of those mug shots. And it was just getting more and more hopeless. And so when you look at that balance between benefits of using and consequences, at first it was high benefits, low consequences, and then they began to even out, especially when I was living homeless, going to jail. But I still wasn't in preparation stage. I still wasn't ready to make that change. I was just trying to shirk accountability and not get in trouble anymore. But I had no intention on getting sober. And I drugged that stage out for a really long time. But I went multiple rounds in treatment. I know I'm kind of jumping over a lot of a lot of the details of this story because it really is long and extensive. But, when you're going from jail to rehab to jail, homelessness again to another rehab, that whole time is a contemplation stage of, okay, well, maybe I can just use this drug and not use that drug, or maybe I'll just drink. I went through that round. I'll just drink alcohol and I won't do any drugs, and my life got better. So it's like, this is the solution. I'll just drink. This is the solution.
Throughout that long time that you did the contemplation stage, your book is called Unhooked, How to Help Addicted Loved Ones Recover. Where were your parents? Where were your ex-wife in this? Were they involved in any of this, or did you just kind of keep them away?
They were involved. Yeah, they were heavily involved, particularly my parents. I ultimately got divorced. She rode that crazy train as long as she could, and then did me the best solid that she could have done, which was allow me my natural consequences, and she allowed me that, and she ended up, leaving, and that was good for her, and I'm glad she did, even though we were in love. But my parents during this time began to go to family courses and began to learn some of the things about boundaries and enabling and where they were helping me. And one of the biggest takeaways that my parents talk about in the book, they actually wrote a chapter each in that book so you can read their experience of what worked and what didn't work. But they talk about being in one of their first family group programs. And that group, the facilitator, said, imagine your addicted loved one out in the middle of a lake and they're in a boat, and with every addict behavior or decision, it's like you're dropping a boulder into the water. And they're out there doing this without a care in the world. And it's like you, Jenna and Doug, are on the beach hollering out to Jason, just stop. Just stop. You're better than this. You've got such potential. And I can't hear them. I'm just dropping those boulders. But by the time those ripples arrive to the shoreline, they've grown in size to tsunami size, and they're just crashing over their heads, and they're just standing on the beach. And so the advice of the therapist was, Jenna and Doug, get off the beach. You don't have to stand there. And then began to teach them about boundaries and putting physical boundaries in place. Like, if he's stealing from you, don't let him in your house anymore. And if he's breaking in your house, put an alarm system. Let him go to jail. That was hard for them. When you are home, if he comes over, only allow him in the common areas. Don't allow him to just roam the house. Just because it's his childhood home, it's your house. It's not his house. And it's okay for you to set up those physical boundaries. And then she began to teach him about emotional boundaries. And, for example, putting on the emotional raincoat so that Jason's reactions don't affect you when you say, hey, Dad, can I have $100? My dealer's going to kill me if I don't pay up, which is one of the stories that actually did happen. I went to him, woke him up from his nap, and my dad heard that story from me, and he looked at me after he had been taught about the emotional raincoat and getting off the beach. He said, Jason, I hope that he doesn't hurt you too badly, but you're not going to see another dime out of your mother or me.
Whoa, that's got to be hard.
And he closed the door, and that was that.
You mentioned your dad was a physician, and physicians, in my opinion, have one thing in common, is they tend to see problems in people and want to fix them, regardless of what kind of physician they are. Was it harder, do you think, for your dad? Did that play a role, his natural tendency as a caregiver, to set these boundaries with you?
I think it was more difficult for my mother, but my dad, throughout those early years, did bail me out and help me out a lot. But what I saw happen in him is, even though he was thinking he was helping me, he was really contributing to my addiction.
Enabling.
Yep. He was denying me my natural consequences.
Which your ex-wife gave you.
Exactly. I saw him get more and more resentful So even though he wanted to help, over time he was just disgusted.
And I think that's the natural process for parents or spouses, caregivers, people that love the addict. They give and give and give and enable, unwittingly enable the addiction. But then over time, it's very common for resentment to kick in, right?
Right.
You're listening to Project Recovery. We're talking with Jason Coombs, author of Unhooked, How to Help an Addicted Loved One Recover, also the owner of Brick House Recovery in Boise and Idaho Falls. Coming up on part 2 of Project Recovery, we're going to find out which recovery worked for him first and what he's doing now to give back.
The contents of this program are for informational purposes only. The program is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, licensed therapist, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard on this program. KSL does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, physicians, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned on the program. Reliance on any information provided on the program is solely at your own risk.